most YouTuber businesses are incredibly unstable. If these channels are getting this many views and they clearly have no idea what they're doing on the business side, there's a ton of opportunity here.
Meet Mark Manson. Mark is an author who wrote the best-selling book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. Wait. No. Mark is a YouTuber who... Hold on.
I guess I identify as like a creator or an entrepreneur first.
This entrepreneur-first approach is how Mark has been able to speedrun YouTube success, gaining 2 million subscribers in just 2 years. But beyond subscriber growth, here's why that approach is really important.
The monetization on YouTube is actually not great.
In this episode, we break down Mark's whole approach to YouTube, from content strategy.
There's growth-oriented content and there's engagement-oriented content. It's very hard to optimize for both of those things in the same piece of content.
To how he's setting up his channel for long-term success.
Most YouTube power users are probably teenagers or early 20s. What are they going to be interested in seeing, say, 5 years from now? How can I be already excellent at that by the time they get there?
They get a 1 of 10 for sponsoring this video. What have you seen in terms of how entrepreneurial most YouTubers seem to be?
I'm going to be honest. I was a little shocked. I mean, granted, the average YouTuber is quite young, but I was shocked at the lack of business sense and expertise. I noticed this too when I started hiring. You know, I hired most of the people on my team worked for other large YouTube channels. And the things that they would tell me about how their previous YouTube channels functioned was absolutely shocking to me. It actually made me more bullish on the space because I'm like, okay, if these channels are getting this many views and building audiences this big, and they clearly have no idea what they're doing on the business side, there's a ton of opportunity here. Like, we are still very, very early innings. And I guess I'll be a little bit specific here. When I say the business side, what I mean is like nuts and bolts stuff. So hiring, managing, clear communication, setting incentives properly, monetization, like optimizing funnels, right? So if somebody comes in through my YouTube channel and they subscribe and they watch a bunch of videos, obviously the next thing I want to do is get them onto my newsletter. And then once they're on the newsletter, I want to like get them into a product or buying a book or signing up for a course. And it shocked me how many YouTubers not only like did not have those processes figured out, but didn't even know that that's what you should be doing.
Just nothing on the back end of views. Like
nothing.
Views, and then that's it.
Yeah, it's like maybe a brand sponsor. But even then, they're like, I don't know how to negotiate a price. I kind of just take whatever price they get. Like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, dude, you get like 2 million views a video. Like, what are you talking about? You should be getting paid like 3 times as much as you're getting paid. It was shocking. I went to a dinner here in LA and I met a guy, wonderful guy, super nice. But yeah, probably early 20s, YouTube channel, over 10 million subscribers. And one of the first questions he asked me was about taxes. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, what do you do for taxes? I'm like, I have a fucking CPA. Sorry, can I curse?
Of course.
I'm getting worked up over here.
Of course. Of course.
I kind of looked at him. I'm like, how much money are you making? Oh my God. So I actually think, and this is why I'm like, I'm really thrilled with like, you know, what you're doing and what Nathan's doing, what Colin and Samir are doing. Like, I think this is so important because I think this space, the audience of this space has grown so quickly, and the creators growing these audiences are so young and they've never had a real job. A lot of them never went to college. We need to get the business side caught up, right? Yeah. Like all this stuff that happened with Mr. Beast this year. It's funny because I've actually hired people who used to work for him, and I heard the stories from them, and I posted it a little bit publicly, but I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this guy, he's going to have something really bad's going to happen. Like something on set, or there's going to be a big lawsuit or something, you know, and all this stuff that has come out. And it's not surprising. It's like, you've got this 20-year-old guy who has never had a job in his life, and he's making millions of dollars, and he's hanging out, like his employees are his high school friends. Like, of course, totally. It's going to be a rat's nest of a business. for 4 or 5 years until he gets it straightened out. So I think there's, for those, the people listening who are early in their creator career, or even if you're like well along, the business side of this is so important. Like, you have to take it seriously, as like, treat it as a startup, treat it as a small business. And if you don't enjoy that side of it, you really need to go find somebody who you can either hire or who can advise you to do these things properly, because you can absolutely shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, this is true not just of like the face on screen, but like the teams too. We've gone through some thumbnail artists, and our first thumbnail artist that we had on the channel, super talented, couldn't get them to respond to an email or a message to save our life. And it wasn't that they didn't deliver, but like, we had no reason to believe that they would, like, we would just get the files in our inbox, hopefully before the deadline that we asked for them, but no communication up to that point. And it was so frustrating. Like, really talented young people who just don't have communication. And it's really hard to work. It's really hard to do a professional endeavor when you're not working with professionals.
100%. I actually, I have a team of about 15 people, of which about half are on the video production side of things. And it's funny because I find it twice as hard to hire people for YouTube and podcast production than any other aspect of my business. And what I have found is that you really have two options. If you want to hire somebody really good, you kind of have two options in this space. One is you go poach from Hollywood, you poach somebody from traditional. And what I found with people from traditional is that they are vastly overpaid and very entitled. Like, they expect you to like move moons for them before they even like set their foot in the door. And for them, it's like they're taking, YouTube is low prestige, so they kind of have this arrogance about them, and so that's super frustrating. And then on the YouTube side, like you just said, there's just this complete lack of professionalism, and I've run into it too with editors, producers, thumbnail people. Like, it is, and a lot of it is just because it's a lot of people who they started editing in high school for their friend, and they started getting paid for it, and now they still do it. And they're 22, they've never had a real job, they've never worked for a real company. So they don't have those communication skills, the punctuality, the dependability, like knowing how to communicate to a boss, knowing how to communicate to a client. They've never had to learn that stuff. And they don't stick around on my team very long because I just don't tolerate it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't have time to train you, man. Like, go figure this out.
The plus side on the hiring front is I find that I get to just act like a talent scout a lot of the time, where like, even if I'm not actively hiring, I'm kind of like building these lists of people where I see their work and it's like, wow, that person is really talented. They're probably undervalued by the market, and we can create something really great together. Probably the stepping off point for them to do something that can pay more than I can at some point. But it's fun to collaborate with really talented people in this space, because now the people that you're hiring, they like grew up on YouTube, like they breathe the culture, and so they can bring so much to you, the creator, and the channel as a whole, because nobody that I've hired on the video front has had the same like viewer behavior as me, which is super valuable when you have people that like their YouTube thing is just vastly different than yours in terms of what they like to watch.
Yeah, and I'll add to what you said. I agree about the talent thing. When you do find a really talented person in the YouTube space, like, they tend to be fantastic. And the other thing I'll add is that what I have found is that because most YouTuber businesses are incredibly unstable and poorly managed, if I can be like an island of stability, I've noticed that really talented people, YouTube people, they just feel so relieved. Like they're just they feel very safe and taken care of on my team. And again, I saw that as like a competitive advantage that I could have, of like, hey, I know how to manage people. I've got like a really steady revenue stream. You're going to get paid. You're going to have work. You're not going to have to worry about the ups and downs. You know, if a brand cancels this month, like it's not like it's not like the world is ending. Things are going to move on as normal. And so what I've found is that a lot of the YouTube people on my team are like just thrilled with the stability and kind of calmness that we have.
And when you build a team like that, I've found it's super important to give them the tools to maximize their potential. Like today's sponsor, 1 of 10. 1 of 10 is a tool specifically made to help YouTubers find better ideas using outlier videos. Here's how. Let's go over to the filters tab and set the parameters for our search. We'll set the multiplier to a 5x minimum, meaning it will only show us videos that had 5 times the views relative to the average of that channel's last 5 videos. And we want these videos to be longer than 8 minutes, have at least 150,000 views, and were posted in the last year. Now we want to dig in and get really specific because we're thinking beyond our niche here. Let's pretend we're a fitness channel looking for our next viral idea. I'm going to search baking because why not? Look at this one. The trick that bakers hide. Here's how to bake the best bread. This is actually really interesting. If you hover over that thumbnail, you'll see you can dive right into similar topics or thumbnails. Click topics. Okay, so this is actually a pretty fun format. For a fitness channel, we could do the trick bodybuilders hide, how to grow the biggest biceps. And the cool part here is that if this video does well, now we have a new format that we could reuse with triceps, quads, back. It's kind of like an infinite idea glitch when you use it well. Knowing where to start and getting your creative juices flowing can feel like a really big task. But with 1 of 10, it's really that easy to get your brainstorming process started. You can try 1 of 10 for 1 month absolutely free using the code CREATOR. Thank you to 1 of 10 for sponsoring this video. I want to talk about this insight you had about a lot of the channels that you talk to. They make great videos, they get a lot of views, but then there's not a lot on the back end. I kind of think of it as like front of house and back of house. I've always seen myself as a great back of house operator, and I've really had to push myself to figure out how do I get people to actually care and pay attention. So I've gone in reverse, and that's nice because then like any gains you have on the attention front, you see a direct correlated return on the back end. Yeah. But curious from your standpoint, what should YouTubers be thinking in terms of, after I get the view, what really should I be doing to build a business on the back of this channel?
Oh man, where do I start? Okay. The first thing to realize is that generally speaking, the monetization on YouTube is actually not great. Like YouTube as a business financially on its own, like having a popular channel, even doing brand sponsorships, you're not getting paid super well for the amount of eyeballs and audience that you're generating. So even if you like, not even talking about back-end products or creating some sort of funnel or coaching or consulting or whatever, even like diversifying your platforms, like podcasting, for example, is financially way superior. You get paid way more per unit of effort for a podcast than you do for a YouTube video. Newsletters, potentially, you can get paid way more per unit of effort than you do for a YouTube video. So I think the first thing YouTubers should start thinking about once they've built that initial audience is like, okay, how can I diversify my platforms so that I can monetize on more fronts? And you know, YouTube's superpower is audience discovery. Its weakness is audience monetization. The second thing is to start thinking of your audience over the long term. I think a big trap that younger creators or newer creators fall into quite frequently is that they get so caught up on that cycle of just like, oh, well, let's get the next viral hit out. Let's do the next, like, what's the new trendy thing? Let's put the next thing out that's going to get 1 million views. A lot of times you can burn your audience out. You can burn the trust and credibility that you've built with your audience. And so maybe you get more views in the short run, but because you're harming your reputation with your audience members, they don't stick around as long, or they're going to trust you less and they're going to be less likely to buy from you. So I really think it's important to don't judge each video or piece of content purely on the views that it gets in and of itself. Think about the quality of those views as well. Are these views from people who are likely to stick around and see another video? Are these views from people who are likely to sign up for your newsletter or buy something from you? Because a lot of times optimizing for high quality views is going to be a very different video than simply optimizing for quantity of views. And then finally, I think it's really important to understand, once you've built that audience, maybe you've launched a newsletter or something, you've developed more engagement with them, really think about like what problems your audience members have in their life. Like what is a solution that you could provide for them, and find some sort of product or service that you can do to provide for it. I mean, you don't have to launch your own products or services, but ultimately it is the best form of monetization that you can develop for yourself. It's going to be the most stable, the most dependable, and it's also, if done very, very well, it's going to bring in the most revenue by far.
Couldn't agree more with all of this. There's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation that I think a lot of creators have, where they make videos because they want to make videos. And if we are to believe that YouTube is a great recommendation engine for bringing you new audience, and it'll continue to get better and better, there is this underlying need to kind of package your channel as the place for something. And that will inform what videos you make, that will inform what products that you make. But when should people really be polishing that part? When should people really be thinking about, what is this channel about? What is this business about? What am I about? How early in the process?
I think it should be something you're working towards from very early on. I actually think that the process that a creator goes through is very, very similar to the process that a startup goes through. It's just that the product is different and the testing is different. So if you look in the startup world, like obviously everything starts with an idea. Bunch of founders get together, they've got an idea for a product, but everybody kind of understands that 9 times out of 10, that initial idea is not what actually works. And so in the startup world, they'll go, maybe they raise a little bit of money from their friends or their family, and they start testing their product ideas. So they create a little piece of software, they launch it, they share it on Twitter and LinkedIn and send it out to their friends or whatever, get some feedback. Doesn't work. So then they iterate on it, change it a little bit, send it out again, see if that gets anything. Doesn't work. They get feedback, tweak it again. They go through that cycle probably 5, 10, sometimes even 20 times. And then eventually they find something that it takes off. People start recommending it to their friends. They start recommending it to their coworkers. Suddenly you get all these people that they've never heard of before signing up for it. People in Lithuania and Australia are suddenly signing up for it, and they're like, oh, wow, okay, we found something, right? And that moment when that happens in the startup world, it's called product market fit. It's essentially you have found a product that solves a problem for a market. And that means that you can you are very likely going to make a bunch of money. And that's the moment then that startup founders usually go and raise investment so that they can scale that product. Creator goes through a very similar process, right? Let's say you want to start a TikTok channel or a YouTube channel or a Substack. It could be anything. And you have an idea of what you want to create. 9 times out of 10, that initial idea of what you want to create is not actually what's going to work, but you have to start there because it gets that virtuous cycle going of, okay, you put out the video ideas that you had, nobody really watched them, but your friends gave you some feedback and it gave you an idea for a different video. And so then you put out a couple new videos of that different idea, and you start going through that cycle. And then sure enough, it's around idea 8, 9, or 10 that you find, I call it content audience fit instead of product market fit, but you find content audience fit of like, boom, okay, this one took off. And suddenly I'm getting viewers from Lithuania and Australia and all these people I've never heard of are commenting and messaging me. And that's a really exciting moment. And that's kind of whatever that thing is, that's what you double down on and you start scaling up. And I think that is the moment. Once you found the content audience fit, that's the moment that you really start thinking seriously about what you're talking about, which is like, how do I brand this? Like, what is the message? Like, what does this channel stand for, essentially? And And I think getting that right is kind of part of unlocking the next step.
I was at Vid Summit this year, and there was a creator named Hope Scope there. And she talked about when she was starting her channel, she was making like vlogs, and then she made a video about leggings, reviewing leggings, and then that hit super hard. And suddenly, like, the majority of her audience came from a leggings video. And now she starts making leggings videos. And implicitly, this just kind of becomes what she is. And when she wanted to get out of that, she had to be very thoughtful for a very long period of time to basically slowly change the direction of the ship so that she kept some people going in this direction, but also like she didn't completely confuse YouTube in this direction. So there is like some risk of, if you aren't being thoughtful about the content or the audience for a piece, if you're not thinking about the audience for a piece of content you're making, and you don't want to make more of that, if it goes well, which you would think is the best outcome, suddenly you're in like a worse position, actually.
Yes, people don't think about this until after it happens, but there is a world where you actually build an audience that you don't want to have. And you can do this unintentionally starting out, like the example you gave. I've also noticed that a lot of times, especially in the podcasting world, like there's a concept called audience capture, which is essentially creators start noticing, they're like, hey, when I talk about this like really fringe controversial subject, a ton of new people come in. It goes viral in these kind of like obscure sub niches. And so they start hitting on that controversial topic over and over again. Well, it brings in this kind of crazy town audience that nobody likes, and then it scares out their core audience. And next thing you know, your brand, you are known for that kind of crazy fringe controversial topic. And I can't tell you, I'm sure you've met plenty of creators too, Jay, that in private, when you talk to them about their business, one of the first things they say is like, man, I got to get out of this. Like, I don't know how. I got to pivot out. I need to like rebrand. I need to launch something different. I can't tell you how many, I guess you would call them golden handcuff situations, creators can find themselves in because they have either committed to a topic or a format that they're not super well suited to, but it generates views, it generates money. They go out and hire a bunch of people. Now they got to meet payroll, and they just feel like they can't stop. They feel like they're stuck.
And you can wind down a channel, but you can't like wind down a cultural perception of who you are.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's really kind of scary. And just, I'm putting it out there because in this pursuit of content audience fit, I could see people just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall without thinking like, if this goes as well as it could go, am I happy with that future?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good question. And it goes in the inverse too. Like on our channel, our lowest performing videos in terms of views are like the videos where it's just me and my producer talking about stuff. But those videos also tend to have the highest AVD. People stick around the longest, the people who choose to watch it. And we know like those videos are not going to bring in new audiences, but we also know it's serving a fundamental purpose for the channel, for the business, because it's developing a deeper relationship with the people in the audience who do want that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always thought of this in terms of there's growth-oriented content and there's engagement-oriented content. And very often it's hard. It's very hard to optimize for both of those things in the same piece of content. So like generally the things that are going to get the most reach don't develop the deepest relationship. And then oftentimes the things that develop the deepest relationship don't get a lot of reach. And I think it's really important to diversify your content. You know, I think the temptation is to just constantly grow at all costs and just try to hit bigger numbers every single time. But ultimately, again, coming back to that concept of like fostering a relationship with your audience and thinking about your audience, not in terms of like how many people are going to view this video, but it's how many people are going to view the next 20 videos, and how likely is this piece of content to promote future viewership. So yeah, you definitely, you want some sort of mix of both, and there needs to be like a ratio of both within your content.
We've had Patty Galloway on the show a couple times. You've maybe met Patty, great consultant, for YouTube growth in particular, and he's a self-proclaimed views maximizer. And I think view maximization is typically best served for an advertising-based business where you're really trying to drive views for a third party. Whereas if you're diversifying your revenue streams and you're selling your own products or your own services, view maximization may not be the strategy that makes the most sense for the channel.
It's funny because we've actually run into this in our own business. So I never took ads or did ads for basically up until a year and a half ago. And because I was investing so much in scaling YouTube and the podcast, and I was hiring a bunch of people, I was like, we should bring more revenue in. And then also I kind of figured, I'm like, over the long run, if I'm going to be in this space for the long haul, like I should really understand how brand sponsorships work and advertising works and build some relationships with some agencies and some sponsors. So we started doing taking brand sponsorships about a year and a half ago. And I kind of had the same assumption as you. I was like, well, let's just get as many views as possible, and because the more views, the more we can charge the brands, and then the more money we make. That's true for like the first year. What happens is those brands come back and they're like, hey, so, those 50,000 people you sent to our website, only 100 of them actually bought our product. So we're actually not going to pay you. We're not going to re-up for the next year. But if you're willing to sell to us for a lower rate, we might consider it. And so you actually start running into the same problem, which is if you're attracting viewers who don't buy anything, eventually the brands are going to leave as well, because they need to pay their bills too. So it is, I do think there's a little bit more kind of intermediation that happens between the brands, the sponsors, and also there are some brand sponsors who just don't seem to give a shit. They don't seem to check or care how much traffic you send or don't send. But for the majority of them, they will eventually look and do the math and come back to you and be like, hey, your audience isn't buying our stuff, so thank you, but we're out of here.
Yeah, there are some brands. There's like a barbell, I think, or maybe it's the wrong way. Maybe it's an exponential curve or something. But there are some brands that they have a huge budget that's all about eyeballs, and they're just trying to allocate that in as few of places as possible to like lower the amount of time they're spending on it. I heard, like Jordan Harbinger's podcast, he's got McDonald's and Progressive, and it's like, what a wonderful place to get if you want to be sponsored by those brands, where it's like, mostly you reach a ton of people, we're trying to reach a ton of people, we'll sponsor you. But you're right in that most brands are running a math problem and saying money in versus money out. We sponsor you for this amount. What was the outcome of that? And I think a lot of YouTubers, they will optimize for getting the first brand deal or the first deal with a brand, and they create this revolving door of new brands trying it for the first time, but they haven't figured out the right pricing to actually build a relationship with the brand either. So how do you think about that now? How do you think about pricing and what brands you work with now that you've had this experience?
Well, it's funny because I'm actually going to stop doing brand sponsorships in 2025, but most of that is just personal. Like it's we could keep doing it, but I've just found that like I don't enjoy it, and I would rather promote my own stuff, like release my own products and promote my own stuff. So, but I would say that the biggest lessons that I've learned is again coming back to that message of thinking long term. Because I did the same thing. I'm like, oh wow, Shopify wants to buy 18 ads over the next 6 months. Like, hell yeah, let's go for it. Not thinking at all about conversion rates or like, is my ad read good? Is the CTA solid? Am I actually sending them any traffic or not? Does my audience even care about Shopify? Like, none of that stuff is going into my head. I'm just like, hell yeah, Shopify wants to give me money, which I think that's kind of the standard creator reaction when those emails come in. So if I was to keep doing it, I think, well, and we already started doing this probably 4 or 5 months ago, is getting much stricter on like which brands we accept. Because if you accept a brand that your audience doesn't like, it's actually bad for both of you. It's bad for the brand because they just spent a bunch of money and didn't get any return for it. And it's bad for you because now you're promoting a thing that your audience doesn't care about. And it makes you look bad. So it's a lose-lose situation. And it's actually better to, like, I think the right approach is, if I was to keep doing it, I would really try to zero in on like 6 or 8 brands that my audience likes, that I like, and try to build a relationship with them over the long term. Maybe give them a little bit of a sweeter deal early on, and just establish that trust and that reliability, and then do some sort of long-term, like 1-year deal, 2-year deal down the road.
Because there's a little bit of a right sizing too. Like there's the brand audience fit, but then there's a right sizing of what the cost of the product is and the lifetime value of a customer. Where if you have a small channel and you're promoting, MeUndies, that's a ton of units you might have to move to cover a several $1,000 sponsorship, whereas you're selling a larger product or a SaaS product that has recurring revenue, they might be able to sponsor you and get a return for fewer conversions. Maybe this is your experience too, because we're also thinking about not doing ads on the channel. I find myself being pulled through the content production process by deadlines that I've promised to sponsors that were too aggressive. And it has a negative impact on the content as a whole.
Totally.
And it's not a great relationship with the sponsor then, because like, where's this video? And it's like, well, do you want a shit video, or do you want the video that like we want to make? And can you give us another couple of weeks? It just like puts a lot of pressure on the situation where, again, if you are selling your own products and services, you don't have to have that conversation. And also your audience is going to trust something made by you if they're watching your channel more than a third party.
Yeah, we've definitely run into those issues as well. I mean, I think creators, you underestimate the admin headache.
I definitely did.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's actually very similar. I ran into this like in my publishing career. It's a very similar thing with speaking. I don't know how much speaking you've done, but when that email comes in, basically the email is like, we want to give you, and then it's a large amount of money. And that's kind of where your brain seems to stop, because you're like, that's so easy. And with speaking, I used to notice this. I'm like, hell, I just fly to Nashville and talk for 30 minutes and I make all this money. Like, oh my God, that's so easy. And what your brain doesn't think about is all of the admin and overhead, all of the email chains, the approvals, the confirmations. You got to send them your slides a couple weeks before. You got to do your pre-event meeting. You got to do your sound check, your VIP meet and greet, like there's 8 million things that you don't think about that you have to do. And next thing you know, you just wasted 4 days on, the speaking for 30 minutes. And I think it's very similar with brand sponsorships as well. Like that initial email comes in, Shopify wants to give you a bunch of money, and you don't think about like, okay, I'm going to have the amount of email chains, the approvals that you have to go through, the deadlines that you set, when it's like your editor gets sick. And so the video's going to have to be pushed back a week. So now you've got to like go back to the sponsor and explain to them and get their approval again. And it turns out that they don't like the single word you used in your ad read. So now you got to go like
get a haircut for continuity. Then you got to sit down and re-record.
You got to wash the shirt that you wore because it's in the laundry. It's such a pain in the ass sometimes. And you don't think about that overhead. The other thing, I mean, you raised a really good point about the unit sales, which is something that, you don't think about very much. Again, it's like thinking about what the sponsor's needs are and then trying to cater to those. Because like, for example, if you're selling a Sleep 8 mattress, or an 8 sleep mattress, which is like, I think $3,000 or $4,000 per unit, that ad read should probably be different than MeUndies, which is like $20 per unit or $15 per unit. But again, as a creator, like you don't really care. So you don't really think that hard about it. And whereas it's actually very, very important to those sponsors. The other thing that I'll add that we ran into a lot is my audience is extremely international. So, I mean, it varies per platform, but, on YouTube, it's 25 to 30% US. I think US and Canada is, I think, 35 to 40%. And then the rest is international. So it's like 2/3 of my audience is international. But there's a lot of brands that don't sell internationally. And we ran into this over and over again, that they would buy an ad spot for our standard rate. They'd get really bad results. They'd come back to us, and then, we'd have a discussion, and they're like, well, we don't sell in Australia, and we don't sell in India, and we don't sell in Brazil, and we don't sell in Spain, like all these countries that I have a lot of audience in. So it's that's another thing of like being careful what audience you're building, and like what the marketability of that audience is.
So if I'm listening to this and I'm feeling like maybe my business behind the YouTube channel is not very sophisticated, what do you think my best next steps should be?
I think if you're new and starting out, let's say you are at the point, you've hired your first couple employees, you just quit your job recently, you're kind of in that stage, right? I think the best thing you can do is just simply educate yourself. Go out and buy all the popular business books, buy the books on management, start watching YouTube videos, start following some business people. Like, you have to treat this as a business, because it is ultimately. Like, you have to be a grown up. You have to think about taxes. You have to think about payroll. You have to think about cash flow. You should learn all these things. Learn what LTV means. What's the lifetime value of your average customer, and what's the lifetime value of a newsletter subscriber? What's the lifetime value of a YouTube subscriber? Like, you should be thinking about these things if you want to have the longevity. Because I mean, it's again, being in this space for almost 20 years, like, most, I'd say at least half of creators who blow up and build an audience, they don't last for more than 5 or 6 years. And in most cases, it is, they did themselves in, right? They either like destroyed their brand or reputation over chasing numbers, or they didn't manage their money and screwed up the business side of things, and they went broke. So take it very, very seriously.
I think the opportunity that people don't realize when they get monetized on YouTube, they get the YouTube partner program, like, I'm getting monetized now. And yeah, you're getting a 55% split of ad revenue, which is better than any other platform, but still, why would YouTube give you that?
Yeah.
How much is the attention worth that you're bringing to the platform? Probably quite a bit. And so, the more you can do to weaponize, monetize that attention for your business, the better off you're going to be.
Yes.
Given that you see that there's still a huge future for YouTube, you think it's early innings, it would stand to reason that a lot of other people will probably rush to the platform over the years also. So what are you doing now to try to stay ahead of the curve of what's going to be a successful business as a channel over the next 5-10 years?
There are two things that pop to mind. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to think of where the audience taste is going to be. The average YouTube viewer is quite young. Like, most YouTube power users are probably teenagers or early 20s. And they don't have a ton of money. They haven't lived, they haven't had a career yet. They haven't been married yet. They haven't bought a house yet. All those kind of typical life stage stuff. I'm an older guy. My core audience is, people in their 30s, late 20s to early 40s. And that's generally who I appeal to. So I'm trying to pay attention of like these tens of millions of YouTube viewers who are today, they're watching Mr. Beast or Ryan Trahan. What are they going to be interested in seeing, say, 5 years from now? And when they're getting their first job or having their first kid, and how can I appeal to those sensibilities? How can I be already excellent at that by the time they get there? So that's what I'm focusing on. And so it's actually, this kind of comes back to this ties into the discussion around long-term value of an audience. A lot of the things that I'm working on right now are probably suboptimal for generating viewership today, but I think that they are going to be optimal for viewership, say, over the next 10 years. One of the things we're working on is getting really good at a documentary style format. And today that is definitely suboptimal, but I think 5 years from now will be just completely ahead of the curve. So that's one way I'm approaching it. The other way I'm approaching it is understanding that I do think as these platforms get more saturated and more competitive, it's going to get harder and harder for people to break through. And as somebody who has already broken through and has built a pretty vast audience, I'm thinking about ways to, I guess, finance or help smaller creators come along. Like I'm very interested in ideas around like creator incubators, like finding a bunch of really talented creators who have developed a small audience, but they still haven't put all the pieces together. They don't have the business side figured out. They don't know anything about it. They've just found that content audience fit, but they're still struggling to scale it. If I can find a bunch of creators kind of in that spot, come in, accelerate their growth drastically, say over the next 3 to 4 years, but then like kind of bring them under a larger umbrella, almost like a studio system or something. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for those sorts of business ventures. So I'm thinking about that a lot, and I'm in some early talks around that. But I think we're going to start seeing more of that down the road.
How did you land on documentary as a format that you think is interesting in the future?
I'm trying to think how long I want my answer to be.
Up to you. I'll let you. You're already giving me bonus time. I'll let you go as soon as you want.
No, man. This is a great question, and it's something I've thought about a lot. So I'll start with a theory, and then I'll kind of get more into just explanation. I think when you look at YouTube, so again, the monetization on YouTube is not great. Like the amount of dollars per eyeball that's being generated, if you compare it to like Disney or Netflix, it's minuscule. But you make up for that in distribution, right? It's way easier to get, say, 10 million eyeballs on YouTube than it is on Netflix or Disney. As an average person, maybe if you're like Scorsese or something, it's not. That means that YouTube it makes sense that the best business models on YouTube are going to replicate the formats, the type of video content that is cheapest to make and has the widest appeal. And I think it makes sense to me why MrBeast blew up doing essentially reality TV format, because reality TV is extremely cheap to make and it has extremely wide appeal. And so it's the MrBeast era of YouTube totally makes sense in that regard. You are tapping into the highest leverage video content format and just taking advantage of the wider distribution. I think somewhere up there is a documentary format. Documentaries are relatively cheap to make. You can make a really high-end documentary for $1 million, $2 million. And then if you get rid of all the Hollywood bullshit, you can probably make one for $100K. But it's hard to get that distribution. There's 8,000 documentaries on Netflix, or something, and most of them haven't been viewed by barely anybody. So if you can create a really, really good documentary that targets a niche audience, you can take advantage of the distribution and the discovery of the YouTube platform and generate a very large audience. So I very much see documentaries as kind of being, I don't know if it's the next step or the next phase, but I see it's another high leverage format of video content. And when I think about, okay, if the average YouTube power user today is 19 or 20 years old, what sort of content are they going to want to watch when, say, they're 25, 26? I think documentaries is probably up there, right? Like I think young adults are probably very strong documentary consumers. And also I love making them. Like we tried a bunch of different formats, and the documentary format was like the one, I guess, as a nonfiction writer, it like makes sense. But it was the one format that I was like, this is a ton of fun. I could do this forever. So the combination of all those things is why I'm betting really heavily on it. I do think people are eventually going to get really sick of just kind of the talking head style, guy at a desk giving you these 5 productivity tips or whatever. And they're going to there's eventually going to be a demand for something with a little bit more depth, a little bit more story, something a little bit more engaging. And I think a documentary format can fit that content extremely well, and essentially deliver the same benefits, but in a way more engaging way.
Yeah, that's interesting. If I were to guess, I would have thought you would have said something along the lines of, because you have a relative head start on the platform, and because you have resources to investing in a higher effort, more difficult medium, and getting good at that before other people do will give you a lead and a moat on the back end.
Yes, that's a huge part of it as well. But the problem, so as someone in the self-help space and the life advice space, the biggest problem on YouTube at the moment is that anything I create that hits and does really well, 8 other people just immediately make the same video sometimes with the exact same title, same hook, intro, everything. It's happened to me probably 3 or 4 times already in the last 2 years. So, and I see it happening among other people in my space as well. And we've, ripped and done versions of other people's stuff. It's just anything, any new innovation, any new concept, any new packaging that does well in my space, within a month, 8 other people have done basically the exact same video. And I look at that and I'm like, audiences are going to get sick of it if they're not already. The audiences are going to get really tired of it. So I've already been thinking, like, what is something that when I do and it hits is like not easily replicable, that other people it's a massive learning curve that I've already climbed it, and other people are going to be like, oh my God, it's going to take me 2-3 years to figure that out. So that's part of the strategy as well.
Yeah, actually, in the video with Patty that I mentioned earlier, we talk a lot about how you can turn your competitive advantage into a viral video and continue to stay ahead of other channels. Since you're watching this, you should definitely check that out. It's a perfect companion to this conversation.